Hello everyone and welcome to Know Waffle GCSE. Today we're going to be looking at GCSE Poetry, Love and Relationships, When We Two Parted by Lord Bryon. We'll be looking at the annotated poem, context, language and structure, essay points, and poems to compare it to. So this video is jam-packed. If you want to navigate your way through the video, you can look at the timestamps in the description box below. But let's get to it. So, first of all, I just want to thank the physics and maths tutor for access to this annotated poem. It's really valuable and it has all 14 poems for love and relationships on there. So the link is in the description. It's not only helpful for me, but it's also really helpful for you. So make sure you check that out. Here is the first half of the poem and here is the second half of the poem. As you can see, it's very, very colourful, it's very annotated, and I'm going to read it out and then I'm going to talk about the majority of the annotations. When we two parted, in silence and tears, half broken-hearted to sever for years, pale grew thy cheek and colder thy kiss. Truly that hour foretold sorrow to this. The dew of the morning sank chill on my brow. It felt like the warning of what I feel now. Thy vows are all broken, and light is thy fame. I hear thy name spoken, and share in its shame. They name thee before me, a knell in my ear. A shudder comes over me. Why wert thou so dear? They know not I knew thee, who knew thee too well. Long, long shall I rue thee, too deeply to tell. In secret we met, in silence I grieve, that thy heart could forget, thy spirit deceive. If I should meet thee after long years, how should I greet thee? With silence and tears? So that's the poem. It's about a relationship that has long gone and it's in the past, and the poet Lord Bryon is reflecting on it. We don't know if this is fiction or real, but we know that since he was a notorious womanizer, it could have very well been real. But by knowing that when they say affair, where is it? They say affair in the poem, that means that this was not a very faithful and honest relationship, since it was an affair. Now, moving on to the annotations. So in the beginning, there's lots of sounds used. Lord Bryon used a lot of sounds such as sibilants, alliteration, and it really makes it uncomfortable for the listener. And he's trying to imitate how he's feeling uncomfortable and how his sadness is making him restless, just like the sounds we're hearing. So when we two parted, and silence and tears. He also uses a lot of death-like connotations, and when talking about a relationship, that's quite unique. But since it was a past relationship, it shows how that relationship is dead and over. And the idea that it's still affecting him now is quite a unique one. He uses words such as pale and cold and vows in the first half of the poem, which have death-like connotations, implying that the speaker is mourning for the relationship. And next it talks about how it's a knell, and a knell is normally a bell rung when announcing a funeral. And it adds synesthesia, which is the combination of two different senses. So it's quite obvious how far that Lord Bryon goes just to show the death-like finished state of the relationship. Now feel free to make notes of these annotations. They're really helpful and they've got really good word level analysis. But now I'm going to move on to the poet context. So Lord Bryon was a poet and he lived between 1788 to 1824. He was a notorious romantic poet who was frequently embroiled in public scandals. He was a notorious womanizer as well. He is considered by many to be the first celebrity after having an illegitimate child with his half-sister. After scandals and debt, he moved to Lake Geneva in 1816, where he spent time with Mary Shelley, that's the author of Frankenstein, and her husband. He then died due to fever when travelling in Greece. Contextual information is always helpful. It always gives you a better understanding of the poem. Now we know that the poem, which was about an affair, could have well been true, or it could have just been fiction. Now let's look at language, structure and form essay points. These are really helpful, so I would suggest you use them in your essays just as a basis. Obviously you can build much more around them, but they're really good for getting a foundational understanding of how language, structure and form is used to create the effects that we're going to talk about. So first of all, it's a cyclical narrative. That shows that there's no progression and there's resolution which can be found. And also it shows how his sadness is repetitive and ongoing, and that's exactly how the poem takes form. 2. The form and meter. So it's written in accentual verse, which means a consistent number of stresses per line. In this case of the poem, it's 2. And this was very common in Old English, which suggests that their relationship is traditional. Now this subverts the idea that the relationship was an affair, so you can talk about that. Point 3. There's a repetitive rhyme scheme. Now this demonstrates the regularity of the speaker's sadness, how it's ongoing, seemingly endless, and it actually takes A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D. 4. The irregular line lengths. Now this provides a conversational tone. It adds to the authenticity of the speaker's sadness, and it kind of shows a continuation of thought instead of a bullet point sort of argumentative poem. Point 5 is the semantic field of death. That's quite obvious, and Bryon frequently uses lexes from the semantic field of death, which emphasizes the significance of the speaker's suffering and the mourning of his relationship. The tactile imagery used in Pale grew thy cheek and cold, colder thy kiss, acts as a metaphor to compare the speaker's former lover with a dead body. Now that's a very unique and interesting way of putting his old relationship. This shows how his lover is no longer warm to him and in love with him anymore. She is basically dead to him. Auditory image is also used as a knell in mine ear to provide connotations of the bell to somberly announce somebody's death. Now you can also think about why he would have used the semantic field of death when talking about a relationship, other than the fact that the relationship is dead. You could also say that, like death, there's a sort of constant reminder that it's missing and there's an absence in his life which needs to somehow be filled, which he hasn't managed to fill in. And also finally talking about despair, Bryon's use of language in the poem creates a tone of despair, obviously mainly through the semantic field of death, but also through the fact that there's an absence in him and he wants it back, but he also doesn't want him back. Sibilance is frequently used throughout the poem and is heard in Silence and Tears and Sorrow to This. This tone is perpetuated by Bryon's allusion to silence. This regular rhyme scheme creates a strict rhythm, implying that things are being unsaid by the speaker. Now on this slide I have the poems to compare it to, so Winter Swans and Neutral Tones are probably the top 2 poems to compare it to. I've written similarities and differences. So with Winter Swans and When We Two Parted, they both have explored the difficulties encountered within a relationship and attribute some of the difficulties due to the lack of communication. Differences include how in When We Two Parted the couple is separated and dead and do not want to reunite, but Winter Swans, they do reunite at the end. In Neutral Tones and When We Two Parted, both speakers use morbid references to death to express their sadness, and the speaker's sadness is further shown through the poet's use of sibilance and sound to create an uncomfortable sound for the listener. In terms of looking at the differences, in Neutral Tones, the speaker's dejection is reflected in his negative description of the surroundings through syntactic listing, whereas with When We Two Parted, his reflection of the relationship is more internalized and metaphors are made about his internal feelings. So thank you for watching this video. If you found it helpful, please be sure to subscribe, and for more advice check out my Instagram at @NoWaffleGCSE. And thank you so much for watching to the end. It means a lot to me, and hopefully see you soon in some of my other videos. Have a great day.